All right, welcome everyone. Hello. Hope you're all keeping warm. My name is Diane Candiato, and I'm a practice advisor and policy analyst. And I'm here alongside our Director of Professional Practice, Carol Chat-Waltzing, and Hannah Park, our Quality and Practice Administrator. We want to welcome you all to the Reg Talks webinar, Understanding Billing Expectations. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted after our last session at the end of February in early March. On the next slide. And we'll just move along to our land acknowledgement. We are all continually learning and working together to enhance cultural safety with First Nations, Métis people, and Inuit, system partners, organizations, and many communities across Ontario. Today, we're all gathering virtually from a variety of places, and while treaties have been made between Indigenous nations and the Crown, everyone living here today is affected by them and has responsibilities under them. This is a photo of art from our shared offices in Toronto, which I'd like to acknowledge as being on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, covered by Treaty 13. Treaties are living agreements that have not always been honored and affirm our responsibilities. I'd like to acknowledge the artists Thomas Sinclair from Couchiching First Nation and Autumn Smith Mishikenkwe of Magnetawan First Nation. I'll share links about their work here in the chat. As provincial health regulators and as dietitians, we have a role to play in reconciliation to meet the broader goal of public protection, and I'm grateful to work and live here among our First Nations, Métis people, and Inuit across this land. We invite you now to reflect on the traditional territory and the original inhabitants where you reside and practice, and we'll pause for a moment of reflection.
So thank you so much, Diane, for that introduction. We can move to the next slide. So what are we going to do together today? Today's session is all about helping you understand the college's billing standard and practice guidelines, and more importantly, how they apply to your practice setting. We'll start with a high-level overview, why it exists, and how it's structured. Then we'll move into some real examples, including cases drawn from the previous college's complaints and common practice questions that tend to come up. We will leave time at the end for questions and discussions. You're welcome to add your questions into the Q&A at any point. You don't need to wait until the end. Our goal by the end of today is that you will leave here with a clearer understanding of the billing expectations, and you might feel more confident applying the standards in your own practice. So next slide, please. So let's start with exploring the new standards and guidelines. And to get us thinking and to warm us up a bit, literally, let's start with a quick Zoom poll. Next slide. So the first poll is, like I said, a good warm-up question. It asks about the purpose of the college's new billing standard and practice guidelines. So please take a moment to review the options and select the one that you think fits best. As a reminder, all poll responses are anonymous, and this isn't a test. It's just a way to see where we're starting from. So on the slide, what is the purpose of the college's new professional billing standard and practice guidelines? And the options are A, it defines minimum performance expectations and suggestions when billing or invoicing the client. B, provides a how to run a private practice and set up a business. Or C, guides practice independently without other college resources and legislation. So thanks for starting the poll.
I'm just helping you out there, Carol. I just launched the poll.
Thanks. Okay, 10 more seconds. I see the answers coming in. Good. Okay, so we're going to end the poll now. Can you see the response?
Yep, I just shared the results. Thanks for participating.
Excellent. Okay, so next slide, please. So the correct answer is A. So yay if you chose that one. The Billing Standard and Practice Guidelines define the minimum performance expectations and suggestions when billing or invoicing clients. The standards tell us what we must do when it comes to billing practices. What they don't do is provide a comprehensive guide to running a business, nor guide practice without other college resources and relevant legislation. Those additional resources work alongside the standards to support practice. So I'll hand over to Diane to take a closer look at how it supports your decision making.
Thanks, Carol. So the college creates policy documents, as you know, and it helps guide us as dietitians in terms of decision making on a variety of topics. Like we have standards about record keeping, advertising, and now the newest standard is billing. And you want to think of college standards as minimum performance expectations. They apply to all dietitians, and this one specifically is for dietitians who bill or invoice clients. And these standards describe the must. We're held accountable to these standards and they contribute to public protection. And they're written with a principle-based approach. So you can apply these principles to a variety of situations and the work that you're doing. Dietitians are transparent, accurate, truthful, and accountable for their billing. And this is a public expectation and something that as dietitians, we work hard to achieve. As we can see in the diagram on the right, you are the front line. You're working with your clients, you're handling and reducing risk for the public together with your employers. And thank you for the work that you're doing. Standards are tools that can help reduce risk in your practice. And as a regulator, you can see that we're here on the outside circles, getting involved when there is a risk to the client, public safety if needed. Relevant legislation like business practices in the professional misconduct regulation, the code of ethics, and other college standards and guidelines serve us, the public, college, and committees when considering our practice and our conduct. And if there is risk of harm to the public, this is where the college has an interest. These policy documents are intended to be used together. They don't stand alone. So we talked about standards. Practice guidelines, on the other hand, provide suggestions and practice recommendations. They're expressed using terms like should or are encouraged. So that would be suggestions for voluntary behavior. As a regulator, we don't weigh in specifically on private practice and business aspects, most business aspects, I should say, rather. Some business practices like billing do impact the public and the public's trust in our profession. And so why and how are standards developed? We understand there's a need to balance we have a balance to strike when we're developing standards. We start with certain criteria. Is there a need? Would clients be placed at risk? Are there higher level documents that exist? For example, are there laws that specify how we have to behave when we're billing, for example? Is it relevant to practice? Does it clarify behavioral expectations related to the obligations of dietitians? And overall, the process of policy development is informed by evidence, regulatory best practices, and it's based on risk to the public. So all this gets summarized into a standard for dietitians to refer to and use, and for the public to understand what they can expect from a dietitian. On the next slide, we also have an infographic that helps the public understand the main takeaways from the standard. I'm going to share it here so you can see it summarized. We have an English and French copy, and I'll paste it in the chat so you can access that. And again, it highlights the main takeaways from the standard for the public. So for dietitians, what guidance should we look at when we're billing? The standard itself, obviously the practice guidelines in the standard, but If you scroll down to the page of the standard, you'll also see that there are FAQs that can come to support your practice. Like, how do I know how to set a reasonable fee, for example, or do I need to charge tax, or some questions that we get. And I'm gonna also paste them in the chat here for you as well. We're gonna speak to them later, as Carol mentioned, throughout the presentation. And we're going to highlight some of those ideas and resources as we chat with you today. So on the next slide, I'm going to pass it over. We're going to come back to the FAQs shortly and more questions later. We're going to dive into the billing standards and highlight the principles. We're not going to regurgitate it, and hopefully you've had a chance to read it already. But today is really about answering your questions, looking at some commonly asked questions, and applying the standard so that it makes sense for your practice. So over to Carol to talk about the principles.
Thank you, Diane. So next slide, please. So an important thing to note right away is that the standard is intentionally organized around principles. So this can be applied across a wide range of dietetic practice settings and situations. So to support you in applying these principles, we also developed the accompanying frequently asked questions, as Diane mentioned, which addresses common questions and offers practical guides for decision-making. So when it comes to billing, expectations are around these principles that you can see on the slide. So first, transparency. So clearly communicating fees before services are provided and obtaining informed consent. Next, we have accuracy, including the required details on invoices and receipts as outlined in the standards. Being truthful, so never issuing misleading invoices or receipts. And that dietitians are accountable for any billing done in their name, regardless of who completes the administrative task. And these expectations align with existing legislation and other college standards, including the Code of Ethics and the Conflict of Interest standards. So really, what the billing standard does is bring together all of these legal and professional expectations into a single clear resource for both dietitians and the public or your clients. So with those principles in mind, let's take a quick look at how they're reflected in the standard itself. So next slide, please. So the standard itself is quite concise. It's built around two key statements that reflect the principles we've just talked about. And that is first one, standard one, dietitians must ensure that billing is transparent, accurate, and truthful, supporting ethical and professional practice and helping to avoid conflicts of interest. And the second standard two, dietitians must ensure accountability for billing. We listed them here, and we'll be going through these in more detail later as we go through some of the frequently asked questions and cases. So now that we've outlined the principles and the standard statements, let's hear more about what the research is saying. Diane?
Thanks, Carol. So when we develop standards, we look at the research literature, of course, as dietitians. We look at the evidence, and we also look at reviews from other regulators, case law, and complaints. There isn't a lot of literature on billing practices of dietitians. We found one study that looked at trends on dietitian knowledge and patterns of billing and payment, and that's in the United States. And I'll share the reference here in case anyone's interested in taking a look at it further. So the researchers, Jortberg and al., examined surveys through the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They surveyed dietitians in ambulatory care settings, and they looked at survey results from 2008, 2013, 2018 to look at trends in knowledge and practice over time. And what they found was knowledge levels. In terms of this, it's probably pretty evident that dietitians who are in this area will know a lot more about billing than dietitians who are in different practice areas that may not be as aware. This is especially important if you're transitioning to a private practice from maybe some previous employment, or if you're new to private practice, there may be some homework, so to speak, to get us up to speed on billing and requirements. They spoke about increased clinical complexity. This is specific to the United States in terms of health conditions, but I think it's no different here in Canada, where we're all facing increased client complexity. They also looked at reimbursement. Again, a lot different environment in the US, but talking about reimbursement from insurers. And we do know that in Canada, the Professional Association, Dietitians of Canada, has led advocacy efforts in terms of coverage for access to dietitian services. Sometimes dietitians ask us about this, but as a regulator, the important part is helping the public and decision makers understand about the importance of regulation. So regarding dietitian coverage and insurance billing, Dietitians of Canada has information on their page, also has courses in learning on demand, and search of dietitian and direct billing will pull up information for you. So I'll share those links also in a moment. Lastly, the researcher spoke about limited awareness of payment changes. So again, just how services are reimbursed and indicating gaps in business-related knowledge. The authors, at the end of the day, the implications were that they highlighted the need for us to understand billing, think about nutrition services within the evolving healthcare system and payment models, and improving business and reimbursement-related education. And that's the key focus for us today, is we can definitely talk about education and we're doing it together, so thanks for being here. It's from a regulatory perspective. Of course, dietitians will access business supports from other resources, the Professional Association, Dietitians of Canada, from dietitian colleagues, which work to support dietitian business ventures. On the next slide, I'm going to keep talking while I try to paste that link. So earlier we mentioned we're not going to read out the standard, but we wanted to highlight the importance of the glossary of identifying key terms. It's really important for us to be all on the same page, so we're using the same language to understand and apply the terms. So the glossary in the standard helps provide key definitions, and we're going to go through them and learn them together through some interactive poll questions. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide, and let me just quickly share those links before I do that. One moment. Okay, so our next poll question is, which of the following meets the definition of bundles and packages in the standard? So that would be a dietitian provides a set of services to a client over a predetermined period of time. B, a dietitian lists services including fees, payments, and any outstanding balances in a statement. C, a dietitian provides a statement with specific information about the services for which payment has not yet been made. Or D, all are examples of bundles or packages. I'll give you some time to think about that, and I'm going to launch the poll. You should see it on your slide now. You can answer the question. The poll answers are anonymous. Thanks for your participation. See the answers coming in. Okay, a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So thanks to those who answered. So if you take a look at the glossary in the standard, bundles and packages are defined as a set of services provided over a predetermined period. So on our next slide, you'll see that the correct answer is A. For example, that might be an initial assessment and 2 follow-up sessions over, a certain time period. Bundles and packages may include other components of dietetic care that's not provided perhaps during a counseling session. For example, someone might identify like individualized meal planning or comprehensive vitamin and mineral assessment. Typically, the fee charged for bundles, packages, or blocks are less than if services were paid individually, and often they're paid for a client perhaps in advance of the service. Block fees are defined as fees covering multiple services over a set period. So for example, 10 visits over a period, they are charged for provision of services when it's not always possible to know how many, if any, services are needed and the time setting the block fee. An itemized account, B, is how it's defined, is a statement which lists a record of services or products, including fees, payments, and any outstanding balances. An itemized invoice is a statement which gives details on the service, the product, or the product that you're providing, with specific information about the service or item for which the payment has not yet been made. And a receipt, the difference is that it's just a statement that confirms that payment has been received. So again, just ensuring that we're using the same language when we're talking about consistency of terms in the standards and what those terms mean. Okay, over to Carol to talk to us about what billing strategies are encouraged.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we're going to get a bit more into practice. So this slide really highlights billing strategies that are encouraged by the college. And as you're listening, we invite you to reflect on whether these are things that you're already doing or if there are any areas that you want to strengthen. So as we go through the points on the slide, first, dietitians are expected to obtain informed client consent for fees and payment arrangement before services are provided. And this includes clearly communicating fee schedules, payment options, and expectations around when payment is due. Second, clients should understand what they're being charged, how much, how to pay, and when payment is expected. Next, accurate record keeping is also essential. Services and products must be recorded accurately and it's important for you to maintain accurate financial records. And the financial records may be documented in the client health record, in the dietitian's accounting record, or both. And a quick reminder about the record keeping retention. Records must be retained for 10 years from the date of the last visit, or if the client is under 18, it's going to be 10 years from the date that the client turns 18, as outlined in the record keeping standard. So dietitians should be prepared to provide itemized invoices or receipts when requested by a payer. If you offer bundles, packages, or block fees, written terms and policies should be clearly outlined. So any discounts compared to individual appointments, refund policies if applicable, and what happens if a professional relationship ends before all services are provided. Next, as mentioned earlier, the point on accountability. This is key. Dietitians are responsible for billing practices carried out in their name, even if others manage this work. And finally, transparency. It's important to transparently inform clients of any fee splitting or fee sharing guidance. So if you split fees with other dietitians, this must be disclosed to clients. Dietitians must avoid suggesting fee reductions or incentives for prompt payments and issuing misleading invoices or receipts. So to support public understanding, as Diane mentioned, we developed the public-facing infographics. And Diane shared the link to this, and it's also available on our college website for clients to understand the billing standards. So let's take a closer look at what must be included when completing an invoice and providing a receipt. Next slide, please. Okay, you're there. Okay, so this slide outlines what is required. So first, you need to identify the dietitian as the name listed on the public register, which is on our website. Include your CDO registration number, RD title, and provide contact information. If you have an official clinic or business name, or maybe a professional corporation, you need to include this information. So I just want to mention that it is not a regulatory requirement to register your business name. However, if you have a business name or corporation, you should provide this information. Also on the invoice, you need the RD address, including official business email. And this is for virtual practice. We encourage you to include your telephone number as well. Dietitians must also identify the name of the client who received the service and their contact information, the date of the service, a description of the service provided, any payments received, so whether it's e-transfer or whatever format, and any balance owing where applicable. I will also point out that if you provide family-based care, dietitians need to identify the recipient of services on the invoice and only bill for services. And in this case, it might be a child, or if it's the parents or the guardian's name, not both. So you need to include the recipient of the service. And if HST is charged, the HST number must be included. Finally, include any additional information required by third-party payers or insurers. So for example, some insurers might want you to add the length of the time of the session. So these requirements support transparency and accuracy for clients, insurers, and other payers. So with these requirements in mind, we'll now look at poll question number 3. Diane.
Thanks, Carol. I think maybe we could just pause. There's a couple questions in the Q&A box that we can take before we move on to the next segment. So there was a question about verbal consent. Is it adequate, or is a signed written consent form required? And then I just asked for clarification on that. So it's about consent for receiving dietitian services and fees. So if you take a look at the standard on the practice guidelines, we encourage you to develop written policies on fees. If you're offering bundles, packages, a written policy is required. And we encourage you to consider if it's warranted to obtain a client's written confirmation, so written express consent that they have reviewed and understood your billing and refund policies. So again, it's up to your discretion to decide how to obtain that consent, like is verbal okay, but again, the practice guideline encourages you to consider that, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anything you want to add, Carol, on that question? No. Okay,
I think that's
so
great.
that one's done. There was just a comment, I'll answer this one live. Thank you from Nicole about providing virtual practice from home, not ideal to provide home address to patients. Completely understood. I'm just going to go to the requirements so that I can identify this information. We get this question sometimes in practice advisory. One moment so I can find it. So the requirement is you're required to post your name, your business address, and your business telephone number on the public register. And that's in our bylaw. So that's the primary business where you practice in Ontario, and any other business or location at which you regularly practice. So that would be your business, your position at any business or location. That's for transparency purposes so that the public can see, like for example, really important for in-person services, right? That it is transparent that a dietitian has that listed. Now, if you're only offering virtual services and you're not providing any in-person services, and you don't have a physical primary business or other business location, of course, if you have any safety concerns, like about putting that information on the register, you can contact us about that. You can make a request to include a business email address in lieu. So again, you can let us know if that's a concern of yours. It's not, when someone looks on the register, it's not doesn't say home address, it just has your address. Again, so if there are any safety concerns, please do let us know. Send us an email, and there are some ways that we can help address your concerns. So I hope that answered your question. Okay, there's lots coming in, so maybe we'll pause. We'll go on to the poll, and then we'll come back because we'll just have to process those questions in a moment. But let's go on to our next poll question. So we're going to talk about refunds. Are dietitians required to provide refunds? Let's start with a poll. So A, dietitians have the discretion to decide whether to provide refunds, but a written policy is recommended. A policy for refunds is required if you provide packages, bundles, or block fees but you are not required to issue refunds. C, dietitians must provide refunds as per the college billing standard, or D, A and B only. So I'm going to launch our poll. This is poll question number 3. You should see it on your slide now, and you can answer. Again, it's anonymous. Thanks for your participation. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Thanks for participating. And on our next slide, the correct answer is D, A and B only. So you have the discretion to decide whether to provide a refund. We recommend that you have that written policy because it can be helpful to communicate that to your clients. Now, if you do provide packages, bundles, blocks, etc., you must provide information on refunds, but as stated, whether you provide the refund or not is at your discretion. So you have to have a policy, be transparently and clearly communicated to your clients. The main issue that we see in terms of is that clients often, it's not the fact that the refund didn't exist, it's the fact that they didn't know that there was, that the unused sessions, there's no refund, that sort of thing. So again, being clear and transparent at the beginning. Consider, if your clients have this clear understanding of what the package will include, what services may be extra, if any, and how disputes may be escalated and resolved. So what part of your policy can be flexible and under what circumstances, so that clients don't feel that pressure to continue if it's not a good therapeutic fit or if it doesn't meet their needs, or if you need to discontinue care for any reason, that it's clear under what circumstances refunds will be provided or if they're not, right? Again, so what's important here is that the terms are clear and that the policy is clearly communicated in writing. And then again, that's specific to bundles, packages, and block fees. If the relationship is terminated on either side, whether it be the dietitian or the client, before all services are provided. So again, that's stated in standard 1, number 11. And sometimes, it might be clear to us, we use our own speak, but it may not always be clear to our clients. So again, thinking of messaging to help our clients understand so that there are no I didn't know or surprise type of moments. Okay, we're going to go on to Carol for another poll question now.
Do we want to take a question? For the poll question?
Maybe we can go on to the poll because I think the poll might answer some of them.
Sure. Yes, let's do that. Okay. All right, so on to poll number 4. So this poll builds on what we already discussed about accountability and ethical practice. You'll see 3 statements on the screen. The question is, which one of these is true? So take a second to select your answers. And just a reminder, all responses are anonymous. So the question is, which of the following statement is true about billing practices? A, dietitians receive an incentive for a client referral. B, dietitians must conduct billing audits. C, dietitians are accountable for billing practices even if managed by others. We can launch the poll. Okay, we'll keep it going for another 10 seconds. Okay, so I'm ending the poll now and sharing the results. So most people chose C, and that is the correct answer. So dietitians are accountable for billing practices, even when administrative or billing tasks are managed by others. We know that A is false based on the conflict of interest standards. Dietitians cannot receive incentives for client referrals, and this would be a conflict of interest. And for B, while billing audits are a recommended best practice, including reviewing billing policies and procedures from time to time, they're not a regulatory requirements. So we hope that walking through these questions together has helped clarify expectations and strengthen your understanding of the guidance in the billing standards. So with that foundation in place, we're going to walk through two real cases drawn from previous college complaints to see how the billing standard practice applies in practice. So Diane, can you give us some context here?
Sure. Maybe before we move on to the complaints piece, we can answer just a couple questions in the Q&A box. So there's one question about what if my fees are listed on my website in the area where clients go in and book? Does that count as consent? So I think it's great to put your fees and your policies in different places. It might be, email appointment reminders, it could be on your website, your intake forms, so that, clients do see them. I think when you ask the question, does it count as consent? I think the question is consent for what? So what the standard speaks to is that dietitians must, and I'm going to go back to the standard statement, clearly communicate fee schedules for your visits or services before services are provided. So what you need to think about is, am I clearly communicating fee schedules for services visits before the service is provided? Have I informed clients of payment options? Whatever, it's as stated in the standard. And so having it posted somewhere, I guess the question is, have they been able to review that information and have they given their consent? So maybe to ask yourself those kinds of questions. Carol, anything to add there on that question?
I think that's a good question. I mean, having it posted is great, but maybe we can't assume that the client saw it or reviewed it, right. And maybe they have questions around it. So it's good to go through that process of getting informed consent.
Yeah. Okay, there's another one, and I'm going to answer this one live. Can you clarify how billing is done if we're working with parents to support a child's feeding? Do we bill under the parent or the child? We have had this question before in practice advisory, and I think the important part here is thinking about who is the recipient of the service. So we've had a couple scenarios, in talking to dietitians, family members may be treated in different situations. So, the intervention that you're providing, is it intended to impart parenting skills to the parent? So that's parenting work intended to, help the parents in terms of behavior changes or the services that you're providing to the parents. That would be different than perhaps meeting with parents to provide them with information that supports the work that you're being done individually with the child, who is the principal client. So I think, again, it's like, who is the recipient of service? And, ensuring that your invoice provides clear information about the nature of the service and to whom the service is being provided. So if the person to whom the service is different from who the focus of the treatment is, indicating on your invoice, for example, dietetic services provided to Mr. and Mrs. X in the treatment of their child, and the child's name. So again, determining who is the client or individual at the focus of the intervention and then identifying them on the invoice. So I hope that helps to answer that question. Okay, shall we go on into anything to add, Carol? Sorry, before.
No, that's great.
Okay. We're going to go on to look at some higher risk conduct on the next slide related to billing in terms of some previous complaints that came to the college with a focus on where we can apply the standard. And again, I should point out that we're not privy to these details of the cases in terms of they're kept confidential within the complaints and reports process. And we receive redacted information to help formulate policy at the college. So what's useful to know is how these inform our billing standards and how we can apply this information to help our practice situations moving forward. So I'm going to pass it over to Carol to talk about our first case.
Sure. Okay, so for the first case, before we start, there's an acronym on the slide, ICRC, which refers to Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports Committee. So this first case involved a complainant related to fee increase. So a former client returned to the client's practice after several years and raised a concern about whether the fees that were charged were appropriate and whether the increase in the fee had been communicated clearly. So at the time of this complaint, we did not have the billing standards. However, I talked about principles earlier. So principles and expectations around public trust and professional conduct were informed by our professional misconduct regulation under the Dietetics Act. And this includes prohibitions against excessive fees. So what did the panel determine? Next slide, please. So that's the ICRC panel. Okay, so after reviewing the information, the panel determined that the dietitian's fees increase were not excessive or inappropriate. Can we move to the next slide, please? And the panel also noted that the dietitian clearly communicated the fee increase in advance and informed the client that the fees had changed since the previous engagement. As a result, the panel found that the dietitian acted appropriately, met professional standards, and no further action was required. So let's not see that we have the billing standard now. Let's see how the billing standard would have applied to this case. So next slide, please. So when we apply the billing standard, we can see how they support both reasonable fee setting and clear communication. So the standard and guidelines, specifically Standard 1 Practice Guideline number 4, encourages dietitians to seek fee guidance resources, understand market rates, and consider factors such as complexity, time, and cost when setting fees. So the college does not set fees or approve fees. However, as noted in the frequently asked questions, fees are more likely to be considered reasonable when dietitians access existing resources, maybe conduct an environmental scan based on geography, practice area, or experience level, consider the nature and complexity of the service or the time spent, materials, and consult with other dietitians and review insurer guidance on maximum fees. So the second issue in this case was the communication issue, specifically communicating the fee increases. So next slide. So the practice guidelines also address how fees increases should be communicated. Dietitians are encouraged to provide reasonable notice of any fee increase and ensure that clients who require ongoing care have sufficient time to arrange alternative services if needed. So what constitutes reasonable notice will depend on context, including the nature of the service and how frequently the client is seen. For example, for a client coming in for a follow-up visit, reasonable notice might mean communicating the increase several weeks in advance. If a client is unable to pay a fee increase, dietitians are not required to reduce their fees, but they must ensure that the care is not discontinued without giving the client reasonable notice to arrange alternatives. So in this case 1, the dietitian's proactive and transparent communication aligned with these expectations, and this satisfied the ICRC. So now that we've seen that the standard applies in this first case from ICRC, let's now look at our second case, and Diane, I'm going to hand over to you.
I'm trying to answer questions, and I will get to a few of them. I'm responding in the chat, but for now, let us talk a little bit about the next case. So this was a complaint that came from a member of the public regarding their experiences with a dietitian registrant who provided counseling to the complainant's teenager who was the client. The client was 16 years old. And the dietitian requested prepayment for 5 sessions. The complainant, who was the client's father, wanted a refund and wanted to cancel sessions after receiving an initial assessment and 1 follow-up. So the client's parent felt that they did not receive adequate information from the dietitian, and the dietitian cited confidentiality concerns. So the panel looked at different issues in this case, but whether the dietitian inappropriately requested prepayment for 5 sessions, whether the dietitian failed to communicate with the complainant about the client's progress, and in terms of clarity and transparency about refunds and fees. So on the next slide, regarding the issue, the panel agreed that the client was the registrant's client and not the parent. Although the client was 16 years old, the information from the case suggested that the client was capable, was competent, capable of consenting to their treatment and directing their own healthcare. So the dietitian had this obligation to maintain confidentiality, as we know, the client's personal health information, and not to disclose information to the parent without the client's express consent. So the panel had no concerns about that the dietitian communicated with the client. However, the dietitian's obligation in that regard may have not been clear to the parent. So the parent was paying for the sessions. Given the client's age, the parent also attended one of the first sessions at the initial assessment. So, in terms of communications, that clarity could have created some confusion. So again, appropriately not disclosing information, without obtaining consent first, but thinking about how we can be proactive and transparent in our discussions so that might help avoid some confusion, especially when parents may not always understand, right, a registrant's obligations in terms of confidentiality. And so how we can have communications at an initial meeting, how we can give clarity on our relationships to ensure that everyone who's present understands our responsibilities, especially relevant here in this circumstance when another party is paying for sessions. So what information can they know? How can we be proactive from the start to be clear, and make sure everybody's on the same page? On the next slide, at the time, we didn't have specific practice guidelines about prepaid sessions or refund policies, but the dietitian that provided that refund policy indicated that refunds would only be considered in extenuating circumstances and at the dietitian's discretion. And a copy of that policy was provided in writing in advance of the client's initial appointment and the client's signed form. As such, the panel had no concerns about transparency. So that the dietitian clearly communicated that and was transparent and got that in writing with the client. However, the panel had some concerns about that lack of flexibility, particularly because the parent complainant explained concerns about the services received and the likelihood that the client would benefit from and use the remaining prepaid sessions. Again, it speaks to clarity and family-centered care. What can clients do if they're not satisfied with services received, or if we feel that there is no need to continue? So if they feel that there is no need to continue, what options do they have? So applying the billing standard on the next slide. When these types of policies are provided, you want to consider if the terms are clearly outlined and provided in advance of any services. So standard 1, section 5 and 11 speak to this. So consider, again, reviewing policies during the intake process, any other reminders, like email appointment reminders, for example. And that speaks to one of the questions that we got earlier, again, about how you're clearly communicating and getting that consent. And pre-charging is not an unusual practice in some healthcare settings. There's nothing inappropriate about the practice, provided clients are informed and aware of the policy. So again, what conditions are in that package? What if does the client have the option to purchase individual appointments? What is your policy for refunds if any sessions are not used? What are the policies for refunds if the relationship is terminated before all the services are provided? Can the client obtain a refund if services are discontinued by either party? What happens if a client is not satisfied or doesn't see the need to continue and seeks a discontinuation. So standard 11 speaks to the requirement to have policies for refunds, that's for unused sessions, and conditions for all the bundles, packages or blocks that are, if again, a relationship is terminated on either end before all the services are provided. So again, a payment policy that outright does not allow for refunds or is only in extreme circumstances could potentially make a client feel compelled to continue in their care, even if they wish to discontinue care or find alternate arrangements that are a better fit. So again, considering client concerns and needs in context of a policy, no refunds. The practice guidelines in billing FAQs speak to that, about being mindful of client expectations, that again, it's at your discretion, but aligning your policies with client-centered care. Of course, in this case, it was family-centered care and the client was a client from the healthcare perspective. The complainant, though, was the parent and the payer and had a vested interest from a customer service perspective. So again, whether you provide the refund or not, at the discretion of the dietitian and the registrant, but how can we work collaboratively with clients to resolve any concerns that may arise? And again, how can we word that in our policy so that it's clear from the start, and thinking about any flexibility in that approach when it's warranted. Is there something in your policy that can state, if you're concerned about service, let me know within 48 hours so we can address any concerns, or things that you can put in place to help have that conversation with clients. Now, this was a sole practitioner case, but it can be challenging when dietitians are in a clinic setting and administrative payments are being handled by a third party. What if the clinic manager refuses the refund? We know that we're accountable for our billing practices, even when others manage those administrative tasks, but the locus of control is also important, of course, right? So know your clinic's policies and practices. How can you advocate for your clients for policies and practices that better align the expectations of client-centered care if you're faced with circumstances to the contrary? Okay. We're going to go through some questions that I think are going to answer a lot of questions in the box next that we received about billing and referencing the FAQs that we spoke about earlier. So we'll move to practice question 1. Carol, take it away about charging tax.
Yeah, and I see that question in the box. Okay, so this question comes up often and it's coming up today. Whether dietetic service is taxable is determined by Canada Revenue Agency, not the college. Most dietetic services fall under the basic healthcare and are typically tax exempt, but this depends on the nature of the service being provided. And because tax obligations can vary, dietitians are encouraged to consult the Excise Tax Act or contact CRA directly or seek advice from an accountant if they're unsure. So the key takeaway here is that the college provides guidance on professional expectations, but tax compliance falls under the federal legislation and CRA interpretation. So Diane, can we move on to the next practice question?
I think we've already kind of talked about this, so I'll just quickly highlight it because I know there are a lot of questions. Can I charge fees in advance? Again, at your discretion, as long as the fee is related to the service or product that you're going to provide. For example, it's related to an assessment or a treatment intervention plan that you're going to be offered, a plan, service, or product. Again, you're issuing a receipt for the advance payment, but you're indicating that the service has not yet been provided. When the service is provided, you would issue that itemized receipt. With advance payment, important to be transparent about what's charged, how the charge will occur, any refund or cancellation conditions. And again, your invoices and receipts are demonstrating that distinction between services provided, charges, payments made, any outstanding balance. So any advance payment charges, again, clearly outlined in your policy and shared with your clients in advance. Over to Carol for the next one.
Question number 3. Next slide. Can I charge fees for canceled or missed appointments? Yes, the answer is yes. You may charge fees for canceled or missed appointments, and this is at the dietitian's discretion. The practice guidelines strongly encourage having a clear written policy, as you heard, that is communicated to clients in advance. Fees should reflect reasonable cost recovery rather than being punitive. Dietitians are also encouraged to consider flexibility in appropriate circumstances, such as maybe a first-time cancellation or unforeseen or intervening events. When developing a policy, it's helpful to consider the potential financial burden on clients and whether there are situations where fees could be reduced, waived, or exceptions granted on compassionate grounds. So overall, clear communication upfront helps prevent misunderstanding and support fairness for both the client and the dietitian. So we can move on to the next question. Okay.
So the next question about reasonable fees. So reasonable is not defined in the legislation. We don't set remuneration systems or billing models or what your fee must be, and we don't determine or approve those fees as a regulator for dietitians. As noted in the FAQs, doing some of the following can help to ensure that you're setting fees reasonably. Conducting environmental scans for dietitian fees in your geographic area, so area of practice, experience level, seeking guidance from other dietitians, from Dietitians of Canada, the Professional Association. There's a consulting network and resources. There's a private practice guide for the consultant, which you can purchase even if you're not a member. I will share the link in the chat in a moment. You want to consider the nature and complexity of the service, what time you're spending, what is the cost of your materials, travel time. Talk to other dietitians. You could seek information from insurers on maximum fee guidance. And again, in terms of this process, how do you set a reasonable fee is kind of considering how you're doing this, maybe documenting how you calculate your fees and how you're justifying your fees, providing clear explanation of any fee changes. So that is for you, your internal process to say, like, I have come up this way is how I've set my fee, so that you've had that chance to think that through and apply some of these ideas. And then when it comes to looking at your fees, regularly reviewing or updating them, this might be done in conjunction with an annual audit of your billing practices. Again, that's a practice guideline, but taking a look at your billing annually, how you're billing, looking at your policies for currency, and then looking at your fees on an annual basis. So hopefully that helps. I think there might be some comments in the Q&A box on that as well.
So we have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, why don't we pause maybe on these questions, Carol? We can flip to your questions and I'll go. We've answered some already in the box, but let's take a look at some of these. We've answered through these questions, so I know that I see that somebody asked if there's a fee guide for RD services. Totally up to the RD, and what we encourage is you to set that reasonable fee. Let's see, there's a question about handling unpaid services by patients despite them receiving the invoice and payment method. That's something that maybe I would encourage. If you can give us a call on practice advisory, I think that's something that we can discuss and problem solve together. We probably need more context and some information. There's nothing specific in the standard about clients who are not paying fees, but I'm sure that through practice advisory, if you give us a call, we can help problem solve and talk you through some of the considerations on that.
Maybe we can take some of those questions and follow up through practice advisory.
Exactly. So there's some questions about the home address and reaching out to us at the college. So if you have those concerns, please do reach out. There are ways that we could help support your safety, of course. And if there is a requirement from insurance, that must come from a physical address. That wouldn't be our requirement as a regulator. So whatever third-party insurance requirements like the insurer asks of you, that should be on your invoice, is not something that we as a regulator would impact, but we do have the requirements as per the standard. And so what should be on your invoice or receipt to clients, and then, your business email address could display on the register. So I hope that's answered that question. Carol,
So I
yep,
see it's 1 o'clock, and
yep,
I feel like we can go on and have a conversation for another hour because this is very
that's right.
interesting.
Yeah, so thanks for all your questions, and we couldn't get to all of them today, but we do provide uh, through practice advisory, you can reach out and we'll share our information, how to stay connected with us, obviously through our social media, but also how you can contact us on the next slide, our contact email. And we encourage you to complete the evaluation today. If you can take a few minutes to share your feedback, what went well, what could we do differently. What we'll do too, if you've indicated your name, we can respond back to you at the end of the
Yeah.
session. If your question is anonymous, please do reach out. You can call us anonymously and we can help answer your question as well. So I'm going to share the link to our evaluation in one moment. Here it is. And we'll close out with that. If you can take a few minutes to answer our survey, we'd appreciate that. And everyone have a great day and stay warm.
Thank you for your engagement.
Yes, thanks so much.